Hello, everybody, and welcome to What's Your Take? I'm Andrew Phipps, and I'll be asking the important real estate questions of our experts from across the business. I'm really excited today to be joined by Cushman Wakefield's Global Chief Economist, Kevin Thorpe. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure, and I'm not going to make it an easy ride for you. So, one of the first things I want to talk about is why economists are obsessed with the alphabet. So, we have V shapes, U shapes, W shapes, L shapes, A shapes. Yeah, okay, there's no A shape. But generally, every letter of the alphabet seems to be associated with economic recovery of one type or another.
Right. Well, if we use every single letter of the alphabet and every shape that there is, it gives us some chance of actually being right with our predictions. I think that's probably the reason. In my view, the economic trajectory is starting to become, I would argue, increasingly predictable. So back in April, we thought that the peak of the economic damage would occur in Q2, and that does seem to be the case. So real GDP will fall somewhere between 30 and 40% annualized in Q2 for most countries. And then as businesses begin to reopen, we did expect to see, sort of a mathematical bounce. And that's also playing out. So, by virtually every relevant economic metric, the data is improving as we move towards Q3. It's still very much at depressed levels, but better. And Andrew, ultimately, I'm increasingly of the view that until the virus is behind us, consumer and business behavior will be fundamentally altered. So I suspect that we're likely in this period of reduced demand. That's going to be a story, I think, for quite some time until there is a vaccine or some other effective treatment.
The labour markets seem to be giving some positive news in the US in particular. So I think sort of 2.5 million jobs were added, which seemed to come as a surprise to most experts. So would you say that's a solid sign of recovery, adding 2.5 million jobs?
I would, emphasize that the previous month in the U.S., the U.S. economy shed 20.6 million jobs. Right, so if 10 people were fired, so far we've been able to bring a little more than one of those, 10 workers back. Ultimately, I think what's going to happen here is that employment is going to recalibrate to meet demand, right? So, businesses are restarting. They're bringing some of the furloughed workers back. And now the next step is going to be to assess where is demand, right? Where, currently for what they do. Where is it for what the goods they produce or the services they provide? And that's ultimately going to reshape the workforce. And all of the evidence indicates that the demand side of the equation is likely to be in this sort of weakened state. And so that will ultimately hit business profitability, which will result in more permanent job losses. I suspect we are going to be looking at, I think millions of permanent job losses across most sectors of the global economy. We have to recognize that the job losses will, almost invariably translate into more vacancy and create downward pressure on rents. And so I do think we're certainly looking at a more occupier-friendly world for a period of time. I think more importantly, more broadly, I would suggest that businesses use this period as a period of reflection. How can we become more efficient? For example, where are the cost savings? And we know that recessions are, periods of opportunity, great periods of opportunity. And so, there's an interesting stat that more than half of the Fortune 500 companies were born out of past recessions. And so that's my advice. I think I would be proactive. This isn't tracking to be the sort of recovery where you can just sit back and wait it out.
So Cushman Research has put out quite a lot lately in terms of thought leadership. So what are you seeing in terms of accelerated trends?
I think the working from home is another trend that has clearly been accelerated. Pre-COVID, we knew that an increasing share of office workers were working from home at least some of the time. The stat we had was around 20%. That jumped to closer to 60%. I think you could argue it went well. Worker productivity was largely maintained in a lot of cases. In some cases, output per worker actually went up. Right. So, and to a certain degree, I think that the productivity gains are just pure math. Right. People gain 2 hours of commute time back 1 hour commuting to work, 1 hour returning home, and that's certainly a trend that's been accelerated.
I don't want to overstate it, but are we seeing perhaps the death knell of the office?
Right. So certainly a hot topic. Really, the thought that I wanted to introduce is that they're not perfect substitutes for another, right? So one doesn't replace the other. In many ways, they do complement each other. And so all of the reasons why office space was created in the first place, those haven't gone away, right? The agglomeration factors, that the idea that clustering creates substantial knowledge spillover, which drives higher rates of innovation, that hasn't gone away. The culture and the branding factors, feeling connected to something bigger than you, and celebrating your wins together. There's the retention and recruitment factors. There's the mentoring young people, and the fact that not everyone is as productive. People like you, Andrew, I think roll out of bed and go straight to their computer and get an extra 2 to 4 hours of work in. But not everybody's like you. Some people roll out of their computer and they go straight to their roll out of bed and go straight to their TV. And so there's a reason why the global economy created 12.5 billion square feet of office inventory around the world. It's because it's a product that adds value. It's not going to be one or the other, that we're all going to work from home all the time, or we're all going to go into the office all of the time. I think it's as it's been for many years now. It's a mix. But what COVID has done, I believe, is it's shined a light on figuring out what is the optimal mix. And it's sort of challenging the conventional wisdom in terms of what percentages need to be where workers need to be downtown in the hub versus maybe more geographically dispersed.
What is the right mix? Is it 50% office space, 50% time at home? What are you thinking?
That is the $1 trillion question that I am going to give you a $1 answer to right now. Pre-COVID, the survey was, I think this was a Gallup survey that I'm referencing from memory, was that most people and businesses concluded that the optimal mix was three days working from home, 2 days in the office. But a huge range depending on what you do, what sector you're in. So I actually think it's not going to be a one size fits all. I think there's a whole host of factors. We're all trying to figure that out, and we're actually modeling this at Cushman Wakefield now. But yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. That's the equation that we're all trying to solve.
What does that mean from an investor's point of view then?
I think there are a lot of opportunities. It really depends on sort of where you are in your worldview and your sort of risk profile. Clearly, we've seen investors gravitating to industrial logistics and data centers and government leased assets. I would describe those as more sort of recession resilient kind of strategies. I do think there's a compelling story that's starting to form for suburban office. Right, if you sort of connect the dots, just based on the conversation you and I are having, that is a trend that really started before this crisis, and now it's being accelerated. This idea that people and businesses are migrating out to the suburbs. Now, it's certainly a trend that was forming, largely driven by the Millennials, right, who are getting older. They're starting families. They're buying homes, and it's bringing them out to the suburbs. And so I do think that even if COVID ended today, we are likely to see a sort of a faster, I think, office growth into the suburbs and other types of real estate growth in the suburbs as well. I think that's an interesting opportunity.
It is, and a good learning for me there is that millennials are older than I might have thought they were, which is good. I don't feel quite so old now, and they're driving this. So I think there's been a lot of talk around everybody moving towards cities. City population is growing, which is absolutely true in lots of areas. But I think, as you said, across parts of the US, certainly parts of Europe, people are moving away from some of the big cities now. They've sort of reached peak city to a certain extent, and then the suburb has become a different entity around. Suburban offices lead to more suburban retail, more suburban restaurants, bars, different housing profiles. So I think, that's a really interesting output of this. And
creating cities outside of the central business district, right? Because millennials don't want sort of commodity real estate anymore. Those days are gone. I also want to clarify, I don't see this as the death of cities. I see it as more of a rebirth of the suburbs. right? That I don't think one virus is going to reverse 150 years of urbanization and super cities being created. But until the virus needs to get solved, right? I mean, mass transit is a real problem, but until we need the virus to get solved, that's really the only way, I think, for big cities to fully return to their pre-crisis potential.
So what's next? So give me some good news, Kevin.
Right. Okay. So out of all of the recessions that I've studied, coming out of this one, there seems to be, sort of a collective resolve to knock the problem out and get the economy back on track as quickly as possible. And you see it all over the data. We talked about some of that earlier, but you see it in things like vehicle sales. In May, better than expected. Retail sales way better than expected. Mortgage applications actually surging. The international science community is all over this, right? There's over 100 coronavirus vaccines in development globally. Manufacturing is actually ramping up simultaneously right next to that. Number of promising therapeutics. We know that the global economy is receiving unprecedented fiscal and monetary support. We know that the stock market, at least as of the last couple of months, really likes what it sees. I just think history tells us, it often tells us kind of pretty repeatedly, that we have a tendency to underestimate the resiliency of the global economy. Looking past the virus, when we sort of come out on the other end of this, demand for property is always growing, right, over the long term because of population growth, and there's, a fixed supply of land, right? And so, the property markets will rebound from this. To that, I have no doubt. I just think it's going to be different.
And all is left to say is thanks so much to Kevin, and thank you for watching What's Your Take? I'm Andrew Phipps, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.